Ciarán loved his profession. A man of steel in his essence, as some said. But he was mostly called Grizz, nicknamed after his grim resoluteness, along with his tall growth already in his childhood. And now, the strength of the blacksmith seemed to be the perfect match, sketching the untold image of a grizzly bear.
The first time I met Ciarán, he was on a road. I was on the train tracks.
Sluggish gait, head bowed, eyes on his feet, but each step strode out, determined. He was used to keep straight on, following his own pace, whatever he was heading for.
November 2019. A year that was incredibly hard for me personally. That year my circle of friends was affected by death in more than one case. And for me the peak was a friend's suicide one day before my birthday. When Ciarán appeared in my mind, I just came from the worst writer's block I ever experienced as an author. Ciarán came from a loss and a long struggle to reach the first station of his personal goal. Looking at his appearance, and him staring back in my mind, a wordless call to follow him, I immediately saw his story was about stations, following his journey. I lingered a while upon the scenery in my mind, not sure if I should trust this creative road, until I slowly felt he really waited for me. He stood there on a junction, hesitant about his own choice which way to go. A choice he already had made, but what he didn't trust was the situation he had to face there. Being an author is always that twisted kind of magic, of knowing things right from the start, by instinct. And yet feeling your way into a story, step by step. But in this case, my instinct was battered. My German book series stalling all year, and a fairy tale project on ice. Facing this idea meant a whole new world, setting, background and further characters to discover. This world started in winter, inside me, inside Ciarán, and as the current season in Crowlight. In a moment of stillness and considering, I shared with that character. While he still struggled for a new and better future, the road branch led him back to his past. When I joined his steps, I felt his hesitation and avoidance. It quickly turned out he wasn't that much of a talker, but a thinker. Finding his voice in writing meant listening to his insight, understanding his silence, to find out what kind of guy he is.
Hi, my name is Hayden. I'm the voice actor for Ciarán and the other characters within Crowlight. I'm here to tell you a little bit of what I think about Ciarán. To me, Ciarán's kind of a mischievous bastard. But in the same sentence, he's incredibly charming as well.
Almost every character starts off as a secret. Ciarán started off being overconscious about his own. His story begins with the homecoming as a stranger, 3.5 years after he left Hellville for a new start. In those first chapters, we follow him literally back to what happened to his world. How he grew up from being hopeless to a solid working class and family life that was originally far from his reach. He comes back to circumstances shaped by ills in politics and society, and yet he hates himself for. His whole motivation to go back to this place is quite ambiguous, and seeing him through this conflict brings up the moral decisions he took there, and how calculating he in fact is about.
Where are your other boys? Found work, with room and board. Once more only half the story, but he believed to see a fleeting trace of relief in his face. Without batting an eye, Ciarán took a breath. It was a forced, calming sound, but also trembling. I want to see him. Conaghay shook his head, his smile gentle and patient. I don't know if... He caught his breath in a deep sigh. See, he doesn't even remember you. How are we supposed to explain a truth to him that will prove everything wrong he believes in? His whole life a lie. I can't do this, Ciarán. He's just 5 years old, and we love him, okay? But I'm not willing to do this to my wife either. After all those years, without any sign of survival. 'Cause paying a scribe costs more than a loaf of bread. Don't get cute with me. You're the one that traded him off.
One thing we can watch him do over and over again, even before he has his first main encounter, is telling the truth about things, but concealing or leaving aside certain facts about. And mainly he does that when it comes to his own failures. So during his visit with his former manorial lords, we have that one scene that completely nails it.
Harold always talked about you as an honest man, you know. And before I speak further, there's something I have to ask you. And I expect an honest answer. Will you do me that favor, Ciarán?
Ciarán grew up to be that ambitious young man having strong goals in life. But before that, his life was just dark. He knew nothing but that nameless slum suburb that would later become Hellville and dire living conditions that took his mother's life and his father's love from him. Besides the heritage to be a village smith or future fieldsmith like him, he had nothing and was basically left adrift with the other slum kids or working for his own survival. That's where his work ethic originally comes from. As long as there's any honest pay to make, no one can say something against you. If there isn't, he won't mind cheating and outdoing others. The people of Hellville know that, and the Conaghays in particular. They all helped together in clearing the slums, and grew from this to a close-knit community. They watched him thriving on that as a boy, not only becoming a well-skilled manual worker in all sorts of craftsmanship, but also growing up a tiny bit privileged, known as Conaghay's lad, finding a father figure in their new landlord. He would take him on his horse farm for stable work, to get more acquainted with horses and the countryside, and to develop his very own interests, helping the other villagers. So subliminal and facing his old neighborhood lies this intense shame for Ciarán, having failed in front of them after overcoming this poverty, and now coming back with even new failures for luggage. He once was quite respectable himself, and losing all that put him in a way darker place than he's ready to admit. What he really faces is that open secret how he left his town, desperate in resigning to his fate in leaving behind his youngest. But it's very calculative, avoiding the townspeople and making sure about rumors and what happened in his absence by only visiting the Conaghays and focusing his news on his goal.
Having to give up his son for the greater good could not have been easy, but he seems optimistic through it anyways.
It's a re-establishment of old trust. Close to their people as they are, they know about their everyday sorrows, loyalties, but also imperfections, They never judged his father, and they never judged him. On that score, they share mutual admiration to their talents that goes beyond the politics of warfare, social boundaries, or even religious tensions. Those are the people that caught him up so many times, he wants their approval for his success. His escape from difficulties, but also reaches for their hands to have something to fall back on. Harold Cornehy is the only one who knows firsthand how he is still shaped by the messed up relationship to his father. They are both aware that a part of that boy he was survived inside of him. And whenever that childhood darkness comes back in life, he tends to a strength of purpose quite close to insanity.
Personally, to me, Ciarán's type of humor is my favorite type of humor. The one that's mischievous and sly, but still lighthearted in its own way. Overall, I think that Ciarán is a very fun character to voice act, and I'm glad Viola is writing this, otherwise I wouldn't have had the opportunity, so thank you.
Biting his lips, Ciarán thought that the last picture he had of his sons, branded in his mind like the scars on his hands. Keen, in tears fighting back his sobbing, with Liam holding him tight from behind, one arm around his brother's chest, but his gaze had met his own as he crossed the door. There had been no words anymore, just a nod they shared with each other, a silent promise he would come back, and a promise by Liam he would take care of his brother. Liam, who came right after him in taking on responsibilities, in being stern and loudmouthed to Keen, even before their mum died. While his middle son, being tender and jauntily like her, suffered most from her death. But in this moment, the tearless eyes of his eldest son seemed to hold something darker than the will behind or their grisly brown colour. And now, that new hope in his heart he unwantingly achieved for Quinny. He asked himself if his older brothers would be glad for him, if they could give up on being his brothers, like he gave up on being a father to them.
When it comes to his job, Ciarán has this amazing attitude of giving his best whatever he does. He really is this professional improviser, proving his knowledge and wits to meet an employer's visions and needs. He can be really obsessed with detail, but in view of social positions. This is aimed at competitors as well as labor relations. He certainly knows with whom to go for his own advantage. On both counts there he is very shrewd. He has a great instinct of when to take a step back or forward. It is totally not beneath him to acknowledge someone who is more experienced or talented than him. But being on the road often enough means filling his stomach, getting a roof above his head, or travel opportunities. In obtaining that, he can be downright a reckless asshole. He doesn't shy away from bribery or getting into physical fights with fellow workers to jump at a chance.
Even if the choice was temporary, it hurt like hell in his guts. After all,
family was all that mattered. And holding together those thin, threadbare bonds through time was everything he could do.
Following Ciarán throughout different situations, there is often an undertone of selfishness discernible in his own thoughts and coming across people around him. This was something already standing out in the very first chapters and came to be a central theme of living in this society. Being able to fend for oneself actually means grit, and doing that in the teeth of famine, war movements and private burdens is a sign of commitment. It is undeniably rough, because everyone knows this game. It is indeed an everyday thought pattern, even in upper classes. It shows up in everyday speech, this bitter, ironic acceptance of common people who can't influence the acts of gods or authorities. But exactly this mindset leads to heartwarming and funny situations. People are so used to meet either the best or worst in others that any exception from the worst is really appreciated.
As long as there's room for their mounts, they spend the night on our grounds. Huh? Beyond that, doesn't look good when anyone sleeps there. Their eyes met for a meaningful look. Ciarán, listen. There's another tavern you can go. About 2 hours from here. The old sawmill, it's a sort of rest house. Roadhouse now, run by the widowed original owner. She can need any help, you know. Ingmar lowered his voice, and Ciarán bit his lip. He knew what that meant. People like him with shabby looks who couldn't pay. The reason why he still wore his cloak, besides being cold from fatigue. An icy, attritional feeling that came from the inside and wouldn't be allayed by any fire. We all must survive, I guess, eh? He wasn't the one complaining, so he just nodded, giving a weary smile in his direction.
Being misjudged is not a big deal. Neither is moving on to a new chance. Actions speak louder than words, and as long he can gain someone's goodwill, Ciarán barely cares about if random people think random shit of him. When he cares for someone, he shows it. When he despises someone, he won't butter them up. He plays that game of back-scratching within his own morals, seeing justice done for friends and family. The most interesting thing in writing him was, he thinks out of his own box in providing for them, but emotionally he often stays in his own comfort zone. In his heart, he knows exactly he left his other sons behind, also for his own good. He feels bad about those shortcomings, so he goes with half-truths, telling only the surface, steering clear of his own conscience. He's telling himself he meant well, but whenever he's doing that, it shines through, reflecting his heart is actually in the right place, and those intense fears he has. In the last years he found that maybe his chase for master titles is not good enough. He is afraid of losing his sons, feeling their silent reproach through this acceptance he sees over all. Facing how set in his own ways he really is, he slowly learns this unchangeability also lies in his prejudice against the gentry and turmoils of war, and that just forging his own destiny is no guarantee of changing the future. Within society, this ambivalence appears as something carried on between generations, as a coping strategy. Yet on a personal level, there's his struggle of opening up his horizons. He would do anything for his kids, and witnessing fellow humans and other parents day by day fighting the same battle, doesn't it make any easier?
Ewan shrugged, searching for work in Olmsted if there's permanent employment. Scratching the back of his head, he fell silent, eyeing up his daughter, who was totally wrapped in wiping her plate with the remnants of pancake and licking her fingers clean in between each of her bites. For a moment, he could feel Ewan's thoughts thick in the air. She deserves better. Like Oddie, like Liam, Cian, and Quinny, and Laurie.
If you read him closely, Ciarán's thought patterns will reveal as an act of self-defense. He moves emotionally inside of what worked for him whenever something got out of his control. The death of his mom, his father religiously torn and resorting to booze, his keen sense for the Crowlight he only learned to fear, and finally finding himself in the same position his father once was. He doesn't dare to understand how everything's connected, because it literally goes over his head, even over his own emotions. That doesn't mean he's not empathic, right? The opposite is the case. But everything he learned growing up was gaining control, keeping control, dedicating all his knowledge to his heartfelt desires. He loves the profession of smithcraft for the sake of love. It began as a way winning his father's recognition, and ended up as a way leaving that behind, building a living for himself and his wife. Losing her while his business broke in was devastating, so making himself indispensably in a world breaking down around him is his last resort. That's why he grows so hardened in passing down his work rules and is blaming so much on social constellations. But right beneath that surface, there's this big heart with a true feeling for justice. He deeply relates to people suffering the same fate. He has a great knack for kids, and this impish sense of humor, brushing aside each qualm sown by his sorrow just moments before. If you think about it, his biggest flaw, this lost boy inside of him, is his greatest strength. He can go very easily from this professional point of view to real childlike enthusiasm. It helps him coming to terms with all that. When he realizes he has messed up, sometimes he turns his own slant to this very simple or adventurous view of a child, putting his churned up feelings aside and taking himself less serious. He goes back to that savviness he had as a kid to await certain events that annoyed adults to death and yet won their hearts. His tongue can be very bold in wrong moments, but when it's do or die, it can save some necks, and not only his own.
Slowly in his movements, he guided the hand wrap between his pinky and ring finger, over to the side of this forefinger, and down the bottom of his hand. Looks a bit like a barn door brace, see? Never giggled at the sight. Now, guide it back to the top of your thumb, and we'll do the same between the middle and ring finger. This looks like a warrior princess, she found, following his further movements in winding the index and middle fingers, forming the final X of the hand wrap. Ah, it's actually an old Street Fighter trick. Have you been a Street Fighter? Kind of.
The biggest challenge finding this character turned out to be his roots. Ciarán is an Irish-rooted boy who lives in a re-emerged Scottish realm, with no really connection to his ancestors, but his inherited name and accent. Everyone else would probably say, "What the hell is this mess?" But I personally just dived into it. Finding out how he speaks, why he changes that, depending on to whom he talks to, was hella fun. He uses Irish phrases with lots of Scottish impact, bits of Gaelic and hopeless blarney when it comes to women. He can be such a cynic when he spoils for a fight. There's this one scene when he deliberately made his love interest cry, and I could have knocked his head against the wall for that. But on the other hand, I can be very short-tempered myself, and to keep calm in those moments is actually something I share with him. I love this contrast of his hot Irish blood in love scenes and conflicts. He often is just straightforward and doesn't make many words. That's something opposite. I would talk someone's ears off to sort out my thoughts. I'm way too much turning and twisting thoughts about things. Ciarán just launches into them. Another similarity we have is storytelling. For me, this was always something grounding me. For Ciarán, this is one of the vague bonds he has to his Irish descent. This is actually where he feels his roots. Once, in his very memories of early childhood, as well as his tendency to the old gods and superstitions. While, at the beginning of his journey, he stands at a crossroads, this is an inner junction. He has this open-mindedness as a guideline that is probably the greatest opposite mentality of a child to come out growing up in that world of religious strife. Moved in both ways by this as the main character. Regarding his worst fears and most daring imagination, it puts the whole world building on a new level. With this setting in Victorian times, I only grasped through my research of real religious unrest how deep this goes. Like Ciarán has to understand the bigger picture, I ended up seeing a literal background map of circumstances gearing into each other. Quite fitting for a steampunk story, by the way, besides driving the plot on. Finding Ciarán's drive in the future only halfway begins with his willingness to change. It begins with a trust in things he already knows, at heart.
And both two met, in forceful speed, defying death in dream's retreat. As tides will turn, our lands retrieved, old strife will yearn, old sores to bleed. And while they sleep, in depths of earth, the old shall find to whom they're worth. A curse, not bane, a call, not speech, their breaths of life merged in decease. And when the old grant hope to seed, that rallying cry'll rouse those beneath. As roots will grow, and dawn will lead, then both shall rise in greatest need.